All right. Hello, everyone. We are Group 5. Our team consists of myself, Ashley Lamb, Ivan, Jared, and Stefan. And for our best practices project, we are focusing on air freight at Nike. All right, so to start with some company history on Nike, their mission is really to bring inspiration and innovation to every athlete in the world. Nike is really leading in the industry for footwear and apparel. Their products range from shoes, apparel, and equipment to sports accessories. Nike has a very large breadth of stores. Their network has over 750 stores with sales in over 160 countries and has over 36 billion in annual revenue. And of those sales, it's primarily made up of their 600 million units of footwear and 500 million units of apparel. Globally, 55% of Nike's revenue comes from sources outside of the US. And they currently outsource all of their manufacturing as well. And because of that, because Nike depends on outsourcing for all of their products, it creates significant logistical challenges in order for Nike to get their products to their customers. So first, the challenge that we'll be addressing for Nike is really their ineffective use of air freight. Currently, Nike's use of air freight is on average only 70% effective. This prevents Nike from really reaching their targets and goals to reduce their emissions by 50%. And additionally, since air freight is their only option to expedite shipments, it's often overutilized when it really shouldn't be. From our research, we will be providing Nike with an effective strategy that will deliver clear change management processes, provide effective KPIs and metrics that will help to visually communicate progress to plan. And lastly, we'll be presenting Nike with a streamlined process to make smart decisions about air freight. All right, so going into really our agenda for our pitch today. For our key topics today, we're going to be presenting really a roadmap for Nike. That starts with strategy development, KPI and analytics, alternatives and KPI analytics, change management processes, decision-making, and use cases, as well as their streamlined process for making decisions about air freight. So starting with strategy development, to begin building a strategy for Nike, first we really started with understanding our challenge statement and goal. And that is to provide our client with an approach that is systems focused, pushes organizational accountability, and utilizes change management to increase their air effectiveness to 90%. In order to understand Nike's position, we performed a SWOT analysis of Nike to help really understand and assess their strengths, their weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Some of the key points and highlights from that analysis is that we found that Nike really has a lot of opportunity, specifically to automate manual processes for their logistics organization. And with that, they have an opportunity to utilize software in order to streamline their freight approval processes. And additionally, since airfare is only 70% effective, a weakness that we found is that transportation is really their highest driver for emissions. It also has a significant impact on cost and is really affecting, like I said, their goal to meet their emission targets. And now I'm going to hand it over to Jared, and he's going to talk about some of the alternatives Nike has to air freight.
So the common mode used to move product from Asia to the rest of the world has historically been ocean freight, leaving from the east coast of China, traveling through the Indian Ocean to Africa and Europe, or across the Pacific to the United States. China's One Belt, One Road initiative will provide an alternative to that ocean freight, which would help companies like Nike shorten their lead times from historically being 30 to 40 days to somewhere around 10 to 15 days into Africa, Middle East, and Europe through an extensive network of road and rail that would connect Eastern Asia through Central Asia into Europe. In addition, the Maritime Silk Road, which you've seen in blue on this map here, would offer new port locations where the different centralized road and rail locations could move down to ocean ports to then move product via ocean cargo. The benefit to Nike here is that reducing from 30 to 40 days down to 10 to 15 days would reduce their need to use air freight in certain situations. Air freight utilization has always been a short-term countermeasure that has the potential to be ingrained into a process as a long-term solution. The One Belt, One Road initiative would help to reduce that long-term integration as a solution and provide air freight as only a short-term countermeasure for situational analysis going forward. High-value, time-sensitive products that Nike sells into the market will always need an alternative to both air freight and ocean shipping to make sure that they get product to market. Another alternative would be nearshoring, so shortening the final mile of both customization and logistics travel for product to the market is one current strategy being utilized amongst companies who had historically been offshoring product to Southeast Asia, extending their supply chain. So reducing the length of the supply chain and the complexity of the supply chain by nearshoring products is another alternative that Nike could utilize to move away from air freight and the increased carbon emissions that it produces, and the high cost of the air freight. So the next slide. KPIs and analytics. So when utilizing cost driving or quality driving solutions as short-term countermeasures that have the potential to become long-term countermeasures, the goal is to ensure that they stay in the short-term countermeasure arena and not be ingrained as long-term solutions. Through goal setting, analytics, and key performance indicators, they can provide valuable insight and transparency to targeted areas of sustaining improvements, as well as visibility into areas that may be cost or quality drivers for specific areas of spend and or performance. The key to having effective KPIs and effective analytics of your decision making is to have stakeholder buy-in and upper level management support that help provide a structured framework to the goals that are being set, the data that's being analyzed, and the performance indicators that are being used to track as a metric. Ensuring that you track meaningful data that drives the root cause and results in action is also critical in employing an effective KPI and analytics solution to analyze your decision making to make sure that you have effectiveness. Nike's critical KPI for tracking effectiveness of air freight utilization is air freight effectiveness. So they compare the number of product that they use via air freight to the number of the same SKU that was sitting on shelves for longer than the 40 days that it would have taken to be moved there by boat. And they use that to establish a metric. And then in addition, building from that data set, they use a machine learning algorithm to evaluate the attributes of the marketplace and products which were air freighted to provide suggestions based on the scenarios in the upcoming seasons where air freight is being considered. So really driving from a short-term countermeasure, ensuring that it is not a long-term solution that is employed. And the best way to affect this is to manage your change management. So Ivan will go over a couple steps in change management to ensure that the KPIs and analytics are being used to effectively help the decision-making process.
Thanks, Jared. So executing a successful logistics strategy must start with the CEO. With full support of the CFO and COO, they must develop and advocate Nike's overall strategy. And with the help of the implementation team, they must lay out their targets and benefits, whether it's for financial reasons. When implementing a change, organizations must consider their return of investment. Successful, innovative operations can result in performance improvements, and improved market performance yields a host of strategic payoffs, from higher customer retention to the ability to penetrate new markets, and which is vital for Nike, as they penetrate new markets internationally as well too. As far as environmentally, one of the initiatives is to cut the CO2 emissions in half. Then they must also have an effective and clear communication. They must identify key people to customize the communication at the very early stage as well. And they must tailor that to the audience for cross-functional supply chain initiatives. The reason for that is an excellent communication strategy will not only strengthen the relationships, but will also build a buy-in, encourage reactions, and identify any barriers that they may have. And they must also identify those who are accountable, whether it's for upper management as well to, like I mentioned, for finance, sales, or marketing. Those key contacts must also be held accountable. And as far as sustained supply chain change, we all know that this is a different task. So the company must have a plan that includes training all functions involved when there is employee turnover, periodic audit of processes, creating metrics that will make problems visible when things start to veer off track. Then I'm transitioning back to Ashley for setting up decision making.
Great, thanks, Ivan. All right, so really in order to provide Nike with a streamlined process for making effective air freight decisions, what we're really recommending is a holistic approach that starts with a clear strategy and top-down buy-in. So meaning that leaders are accountable and are really taking ownership of their organization's targets, as well as focusing on a competitive advantage. In order to effectively manage progress to plan, as Jared talked about a bit earlier, we'll have KPIs and metrics that really tell a story on how we're progressing with targets, specifically for emissions as well as margins. We're also recommending transitioning the current manual process for approving expedited shipping to a software-assisted program. And we'll talk a little bit more in depth about that software on the next chart. But utilizing software to manage these approvals will work to create an enterprise standard, will provide clear, repeatable processes that work across business units and really have that built-in cross-functionality. And recommendations from the software will also enable leaders to help make those smarter decisions regarding air freight. And then last, for improvements, we'll be checking and adjusting, right? So always monitoring the system for performance and making adjustments as needed. And then when we do make adjustments, that we are effectively communicating that out. Okay, so moving into a little bit more detail about the software that we are recommending to Nike. So from our research and sourcing different vendors out there, we are recommending a solution from a company called Aquative. They've been able to provide similar customers in our industry with anywhere from a 7 to 10 reduction in air freight. So we really believe that by implementing a software of this type, Nike was going to be able to help improve their air freight effectiveness and reach their goals. And utilizing a system-based approach for freight approvals, as I mentioned, not only creates an enterprise standard, but it also helps eliminate silos between organizations. And specifically, it's going to help Nike automate a lot of the non-value-added manual process currently in place for this process. Ultimately, like I said, helping Nike reach their targets for emissions as well as cost. So next up, we're going to transition over to Stefan, and he's going to go into some of the different use cases.
Thank you, Ashley. Up until this point, we've really talked about how to bring air freight down, but I want to talk a little bit about why Nike and other organizations use air freight at all. So the first is to meet high demand. So one of the most important categories for Nike to ensure that they have margin and growth is their high heat and launch category. High heat and launch product is product associated with a sports moment, a very hot trend, or maybe even a musician. For high heat launch product, what Nike expects to see is that all of the product that they bring to market will be sold out in a matter of days or even minutes. To be able to get that full price sell-through on a very specific launch date, while it's still part of the cultural awareness, air freight is used to bring that product in. The second area where Nike uses air freight to meet demand is to take advantage of market opportunity. When there's a new trend that's emerged and Nike has some product in the marketplace, or maybe a competitor hasn't been able to meet the demand of the marketplace, one of the opportunities Nike has is to be able to use air freight to bring much more product into the market where the demand is to be able to drive full price sell-through. You can move to the next slide, please. Moving away from demand and thinking about having a steady, predictable supply chain, I'm going to talk about some uses of air freight to keep things moving. The first is uptime. So for a manufacturing facility or any facility completing a standardized process, two of the things that you need are the parts and components to keep the machines running and the raw materials to feed into those machines to provide you your finished good. Downtime in facilities can be measured from anything from thousands of dollars an hour to millions of dollars a minute. So in these cases, where the difference between being able to produce a product that you can sell or not being able to have it is the lead time to be able to get parts to that facility, air freight is used to keep uptime up. The second opportunity is coverage. When marketplace demand isn't being met because there aren't enough of a certain kind of good in the marketplace to meet previously committed sales, air freight is one way to be able to play catch up. Usually this arises when manufacturing is delayed because of availability or a process that was maybe more complex than originally estimated. And air freight is a way to cover some ground quickly. In both of these cases, we would expect that the operational improvements being driven by the KPIs and the root cause analysis that follows should be able to reduce using air freight for these two scenarios. And I'm going to talk about one more use case here that's not so Nike specific, but I think is also pertinent. Go to the next slide. There are products out there where time to market is extremely important. So iPhones and fish may not seem to have a lot in common, but what they do have in common is that there's a very, very short window where both of them are able to be sold at full price. For high-tech products that measure their entire life cycle in a year or less, there's a finite window where they can be sold at full price. Being able to use air freight to bring them to market and cut off that 40 days on the water means that there's a longer period that they can be sold at before competitors and technology and consumers have moved on. Similarly, for specialty fresh food items that may measure their entire period of usability or edibility in days, being able to use air freight to move something like fish to market quickly is the difference between that fish being sold for dozens of dollars a pound or not having any value at all. And finally, I want to move through a quick conclusion to bring this all together. So as we've talked about now, to use air freight effectively, you need to identify the use cases where it's truly important to your business and to its competitive advantage. You need to create a consistent decision-making framework, ideally enabled by a system that helps make the change stick and make sure that that change has been truly communicated to the stakeholders that are involved. And you need to be able to make that decision quickly enough for it to matter. Lastly, after the decision has been made and you have some data about the way that you've used air freight, you need to be able to use KPIs, metrics, and supporting analytics to really understand why you've used air freight in the past, why it was effective, and what you can do in the future to reduce your dependency on it and use it only when it is critical to your competitive advantage. Thank you.